Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got in my hand a brand new worm bin that's not yet populated with any worms. And into this bin I'm planning on placing worms that I'm going to extract from my VermiBag Mini. In my VermiBag Mini I've got European nightcrawlers, and as a matter of fact it's something that I did only a couple days ago. It was a couple days ago that we went into the VermiBag Mini and we extracted about a half a pound or more of European nightcrawlers. And at the end of the video, unfortunately, there was no release because a lot of my videos where we collect up the worms, we end the video by putting them into their new habitat. And we get to watch the worms all squirm into their new space, and it's kind of interesting to watch. And it was a little bit of a letdown, I guess, in the last video if you saw it, that there was no worm release. But on this go around, there is going to be a worm release. So hopefully, by having only done this a couple days ago. It's still fresh in my mind, so I'll be able to do it a little bit more efficiently, hopefully, than I did 2 days ago. And then I'll have a little bit of peace of mind because up until now I've only had one container, the VermiBag Mini with the European nightcrawlers, and up until a very short period of time ago, it was this container down here where I had all of my African nightcrawlers. But I'm really glad that, not too long ago I did launch off a second African nightcrawler container, and I've been promising myself setting up a second European nightcrawler container, and today is finally the day. So I'm about to get to work on this. I figured I'd bring you along. So let's get started. So as I did 2 days ago when we did this last, I'm going to be using this plastic container right here. It's a pretty good sized container, and I'm simply going to scoop out material that I think might be pretty heavily populated. So I'm going to be looking for material near the feeding areas, near the food, which is where I'm assuming I'm going to find the majority of the material that's got large amounts of worms hanging out in it. And I'm going to be pretty much scooping it out of here wholesale so as to not give the worms time to squirm away. And then we're going to sift through all that material once it's in the container and we can get it up on the bench and more easily work on it. And then we're going to work on separating the worms from the castings that they're inhabiting. So this thing looks pretty nice. It's only been a couple days since we put that plastic back on top here to cover things up, and the plastic always creates this really nice kind of glistening moist top surface. As we normally do, the feedings have been occurring down the middle, so I'll usually assume that the worms are right there down the middle, not too deep below the surface. So I'll skim a little bit of material off the top, but as soon as I start seeing a decent number of worms, we'll start scooping. So let me get this container here nearby, just so I'm ready. Yeah, you know what? I think we should just start scooping. I had put a new feeding in here 4 days ago. It's a pretty good haul for the first handful. So it was only, what, 4 days ago that I had fed this bin. The way I fed, though, I had placed all the old food items that we were able to locate in here right on top of the feeding. So the worms are actually inhabiting food that's from feedings gone by from weeks and weeks ago. Mostly materials that take a fair bit of time to break down. So most of the stuff that I pile on top of the fresh food is older food, stuff like mango pits and stuff like that take a longer time to break down. But since that stuff has already been started, usually it has a fair number of worms in it. That last handful didn't seem like it had too many worms in it. I'm not quite sure what I'm after in terms of the quantity. Obviously, I'd like to get a good number of worms out of here to start a new bin with, but I also don't want to deplete the number of worms in this container either. Like I said, it was just a few days ago that I extracted worms from this container. And now here I am again doing it a second time in only a couple days. So I just keep banking on the fact that, or at least keep hoping, hoping for the fact that hopefully there's a good number of worms in here, despite the fact that I'm pulling a good number of them out, and that I'm not depleting their population to a point where the bin's suddenly going to become inefficient or very slow on the breakdown of materials that I put in there. And every handful can see a good number of worms, and I don't know if there's a good way to estimate how many worms might be in a single handful like this. But I would have to think at least a couple dozen, right? So I can't remember. I've lost count. I've probably scooped out at least 5 or 6 handfuls at this point. So if if each of those handfuls has 15, 20 worms in it, or maybe more, we might have ourselves a few hundred worms already. It's always a little bit difficult to estimate. We will hopefully get a better view of how many worms we extracted once we try separating the worms from the material that they're inhabiting. Usually after that happens, the worms are, a lot easier to see because they're not, mixed in with a whole bunch of stuff that they're inhabiting. And I guess, it probably doesn't matter how many worms I start with, because in time they'll reproduce and they'll increase their numbers on their own. And I'll just be happy to have a secondary bin in which I've got European nightcrawlers. And in time I might actually try even expanding my population further to get, more bins started with these more unique worms that I have. The majority of the worms that I have in my wormery are red wigglers, and up until now there was only just one container with the Euros and one container with the Africans. So I'm kind of glad to be finally expanding the population of the night crawlers in my wormery. Not sure how deep we have to get to find that feeding from 4 days ago. This bin has been getting a lot of attention lately. 4 days ago it got fed. 2 days ago we extracted worms. Now today we're extracting worms again. I just figured this is kind of a unique opportunity because it's not every day that you go into your flow-through worm system and scoop out a whole bunch of material. And I guess the opportunity I was seeing here was kind of maybe going a little bit deeper than I normally do, maybe even going all the way down to the bottom to see if I could find any larger chunks of like uneaten food or bedding that might be down really deep. Because I guess my hopes for this system is that at some point when it comes time to harvest this continuous flow through system, which means you're opening a hatch at the bottom and letting the castings drop out the bottom, what I'm hoping for is that the material that drops out at that point is really nice stuff, not stuff that's littered with all kinds of large chunks of stuff that have not been broken down. And by having removed, I get at this point a pretty good amount of material off the top, it seems like this might be a good time to try to probe down deeper to see if I could find any larger chunks of stuff down low. And then, do nothing more than just, bring them closer to the surface where I can keep a closer eye on them. But then I'd also know for a fact that down deep in my bin I've got only castings, so that at some point in the future when it comes time to harvest this batch of vermicompost, I can kind of count on the fact that what comes out the bottom is going to be mainly castings only. And it does seem like we're pretty close to the bottom. Just wondering if I could get a few more handfuls of material that's pretty densely populated with worms. That would give us, even less stuff down in the bag. And then maybe it would just be a quick chance to go probing through really fast and trying to pluck out anything large like that. And as long as we're down here, I might as well see if I can find the previous feeding, right? Because here's one of them and 2 of them, right? So I had bundled up the last feeding into little paper packets, which actually makes it really convenient for simply pulling it out. And now we're that much closer to the bottom. Then I've also got this stack of larger chunks of items that I've already found. Mango seeds, some crumbled up cardboard. I guess I could pull these out just as easily now. And I think I will do just that. I'm going to go right down into the bottom. At this point I'm putting the container down so I can really lean into this and and do an efficient job. But if I could find large chunks of stuff, I guess I'll I guess I'll stack it up somewhere in a corner. But you know what? Let's build a corner that will be good for stacking up stuff. What's this? Oh, more large chunks of stuff. This is a good thing to pull out, because right away we're bringing a whole bunch of worms with it. It's a cantaloupe rind, so it's not surprising that there's a whole bunch of worms hanging out on it. Alright, so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out this far corner from me first. Kind of pull everything away from it as best as I can. And then all those people that are always telling me, you know, hey, this is a flow-through bag, dude. You're not supposed to be messing with it so much. You're not supposed to be probing around and digging it up. And I guess this will be my last chance, right? This will be my last chance to really confirm for myself that the stuff that's at the bottom of this container is really just a bunch of really nice castings, and when the time comes to drop it all out the bottom, it won't be full of junk. Or maybe we'll just find so much junk that we'll just decide that it's futile to try to pick it all out. And then I'll just have to accept the fact that stuff that comes out at the bottom, when time comes to harvest, this will not be perfect, clean castings, but it'll be stuff that's littered with all kinds of this and that. I mean, I'm kind of glad that I've so far not really found anything significant. And I'm pretty sure at this point my fingers are scraping the bottom of the container. It also kind of helps me understand what the layout of the bottom is like too. I think, you know, now that we've kind of stirred things up, we're probably seeing a lot more worms just dropping down into the hole, but I believe at first there were very few worms actually down that deep. Because I think the worms tend to work the surface a little bit more, which makes sense because that's where all the fresh food is always being piled in. And down deep, there's, you know, not a whole lot of reason to be there with all the fresh food on the top surface. So I guess all the worms that I've kind of sent to the bottom in this process, they'll have to just make their way back up. I'm sure it's not a big problem for them. Luckily, I'm loosening up all the material here for them, so it should be pretty straightforward. Pretty easy for them to break through it. So here's some more stuff that we've not really jostled up yet. And I guess if we get a chunk of it, we could see it's really nice stuff. I don't really see any worms in it. Naturally, there are worms rolling down into the hole as I continue doing this. It's been down there for a long time. It appears to be pretty much worm-free. And, you know, I think here and there I am locating, you know, a chunk of this, a chunk of that, but certainly nothing major. Just kind of a relief. I really didn't know what to expect. I just had this kind of funny feeling that the bottom would be, you know, riddled with all kinds of large chunks of old, slow composting food items that have been more or less abandoned by the worms. But I'm kind of pleased at what I'm finding down low inside this bag. The material all looks really nice. I've not really located any significant large chunks of anything yet. So I'm thinking we'll build back the opposite side that we just tilled down into, and I guess these few scraps that I did extract and pile up here in the corner, we'll pull those out now. And we'll kind of scoot around. I'll relocate to this other side here. Now we can start continuing this clockwise excavation, going around and around. It's like now I'm actually, no, you know, I thought I found something large, but I was just feeling the seam of the fabric down there. My finger sort of caught it, and I thought I had grabbed something pretty good sized, but it was just the edge of the container. Nothing really there. So I'm really starting to get that kind of good feeling at this point that when the time comes to finally harvest the material from this container, what I'll really be ending up with is some pretty decent material that's for the most part castings only. And it's just sort of this, curiosity that's been in the back of my mind for, a long time now. I've had this system in service for over a year now, and I've never yet harvested the castings. And in a way, I'm just kind of giving myself a little sneak preview into how this stuff's going to look someday when I do pull it out of here. And I'm sure by aerating it a little bit like this and kind of stirring it up some, it's going to maybe recharge the, kind of the microbial activity in it, giving a little bit more air to the microscopic organisms that inhabit the material down deep, and maybe sort of energizing them a little bit to give it all one more push to try to break things down even further for me, make it look really nice. Funny how some of these worms crawl in underneath the folds of the fabric that make up the container. Every time I find something large, I assume that it just ended up down there because of my stirring. I don't think it's because it's been down there all the while. I think what we're really finding down there is pretty much castings only, which is a good thing. And it was always a little bit of a mystery for me. I never knew exactly what to expect. So I don't feel like I've got to be overly thorough at this point. I don't feel like I've, found a whole bunch of stuff and I'm likely to find more. At this point, I just feel like I'm maybe doing a good thing by sort of stirring up the material, sort of injecting a little bit of oxygen and looseness into it. But I think we're pretty much done for the most part. I've collected a few things here that I've stacked up. We'll put those aside. And I think this whole deep down probe is pretty much finished. Yeah, I think we've pretty much confirmed that almost the entirety of this bin at this point, with everything that we've removed, is either castings or worms. We pretty much pulled out all the recently added food bundles, as well as all the larger scraps of old uneaten food and bedding that we located on the way down. So I'll feel better knowing that when I put all that stuff back in, it's going to be near the surface, and that it'll be, in a place where the worms are most likely hanging out, and we'll have a better chance at being all broken down. So that's pretty cool. I'm kind of glad I got to indulge my curiosity on this. Something I've thought about doing for some time now, and I'm glad that I kind of talked myself into it. So I guess all you purists out there, all you people are thinking to yourselves, geez Louise, guy's got a worm flow-through system and he just doesn't doesn't use it even remotely the way it's intended to be used. Maybe from this point on, I think by knowing now that the material, at least down below the seam over here below the window, the seam that you can see down here, at least I know at that point everything below that is pretty much castings only, and I pretty much confirmed it at this point. Uh-oh, I've destroyed another glove. That's okay. Before we get too far along, I believe one other thing we could do here is we can at least restore the food items that we pulled out of here. And I don't want to go too deep, right? I try to keep things a little closer to the surface from this point forward. And rather than using the whole burying it in existing material, maybe I'll try adopting a process where I bury stuff with fresh leaves or something else. So I don't know. I'm going to be playing with different ideas that I've got on how to continue managing this system. But we've got one bundle here, as well as this piece of cantaloupe that I've removed the worms from, plus this second bundle, which is a little larger than the other bundle. So now I'm kind of putting them side by side instead of stacked up on top of one another. And these are all those mango seeds. I believe this is maybe a corn cob, what's left of it. So I'm just taking all this other food scrap and bedding scrap material that we found along the way and placing it on top. And there's really not that much. I kind of had this feeling there'd be more. And that's a good thing. Okay. So now as we start sifting through the material that we've collected out of here, we'll probably find other things in that too. So before we cover things up here too much, I'm going to leave this open, so just in case we find some other food scraps, I'm going to place it right in there. All right, so let's go sifting through the material we collected. And I think I'll get myself a fresh glove. You can see here in this plastic container, I've got a variety of different gloves here. So I don't use brand new gloves for this. These gloves are from someone that I know worked in a facility where they cared for elderly people, and they had to use the gloves just for doing everyday things. And then the gloves were never really soiled much. They were just there for, I guess, protection or whatever. So these were all put aside for me to try to get some more use out of rather than throwing them away. And, whenever I break one of these once in a while, I don't feel so bad because I know that I've at least been the second person to use them. But I'm kind of glad to be done with this very light colored blue one, because these are the real flimsy ones. These other ones, I believe, are a little bit thicker, a little bit more sturdy. And those always last me a lot longer. These light blue ones were the ones that always tore on me, but I'm kind of glad that this is the last of these light blue ones. I'll try to be a little bit gentler with these so I don't destroy them. Hopefully we'll get a few uses out of them. So I've got here a little plastic tub that I'm going to put the material into that I scoop out of here. And it's usually pretty easy to get the material out that's been depopulated by worms. You basically take the stuff off the top. As long as you're running bright lights like I've got here above me, the worms tend to go the opposite direction, trying to get away from the bright lights. So it's pretty easy to just scoop off material from the top that has been, for the most part, depopulated already. And here again, I'm going to try to start leveraging some of the knowledge I gained from doing this a couple days ago. I did find that I don't have to go crazy waiting for every worm to leave the material, because, number one, it's not the end of the world if one or two worms make their way back into the VermiBag Mini. But in most cases, if a worm does sneak through, it's very easy for me to see them once it's all in here in this little container and everything's kind of easy to pick through. I can pick out any little guys that came along for the ride that I didn't want to have come, and I want them, in my collection of worms that I'm pulling together, and I can just put them right back into the larger tub, which, once we're done doing this, will hopefully be mostly worms, because we're just gonna keep skimming and removing as much of this as we can, and in time, hopefully what we'll be left with is pretty much nothing but worms. Here's another larger chunk of something. Definitely belongs back in the VermiBag Mini, so I can keep getting worked down. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, everything belongs back in the VermiBag Mini except for the worms that we're enlisting here for this little mission. This container is not that large. I'll only be able to go so far before I need to empty it. But we'll probably get to a certain point too where we're going to need to probably give the worms a little more time to dive down too. My hope is that the worms, all saw the bright lights overhead and all dove down as deep as they could, and that they're already all down near the bottom. Because, as I skim here, I don't really feel like I'm encountering too much as I go. So, I don't know, maybe I'll turn the camera off and do some of this offline, since it's not very exciting, not a lot of worm spotting happening here. But in time, as we get through a lot of this material and there's less and less castings and food scraps remaining, we'll probably start encountering a much greater density of worms within this material. So yeah, why don't I do that? I'm going to pause the camera now and And I'll try working through this material a little bit further on my own, and then we'll regroup here when it looks like there's maybe a little bit more interesting stuff to see in terms of more worms to be spotted. So now I've already gone through a couple emptyings of the little tray that we've got here on the side. I've been trying to stack the stuff up into the middle every time, so I just gave the pile a few minutes to kind of let the worms dive. So I figured I'd just bring you guys back now, because as I start skimming now, it does seem to me like I'm hitting far greater concentrations of worms right beneath the surface here. So I'm starting to feel like maybe we're getting pretty close to the point where we've, managed to extract the majority of the material out of here that's not worms. All of this food scraps and bedding scraps. And this process also seems to work pretty good, just doing the skim, but not always needing to wait the entire time for all the worms to be out of view. If I know that there's going to be a couple worms coming along for the ride when I do a skim, then I just pick them up at the end and throw them right back where they belong. So yeah, like I said, I think the material is starting to get more and more densely populated with worms each time I do a skim. So my hope is that we're getting pretty close. I mean, I'm going to have to give this a minute or two for these little guys to dive down anyway, so I figure let's do a little close-up inspection of what we can see here. And you can probably see, each time I pull some aside here, we've got almost worms only. It does seem like we're kind of getting to that point now, getting close at least. So, all right, just going to see if I could reconstruct this little stack one more time. Then I'll just resume the whole thing of skimming the top, letting the worms dive, and I think we're getting pretty close. So I'll pause here again, and we'll regroup when I'm closer. I'm pretty fortunate because it's been pretty easy to pull out handfuls of stuff with no worms in it, and then if I do spot one that came over for the ride, it's very easy to just pull them out of here and throw them back in. But as you can see, I'm definitely getting closer to the finish line here. The pile keeps getting smaller and smaller, and I must admit it is getting more and more difficult to pull off castings without worms in them. I mean, they're doing a good job diving down, trying to get away from the bright light. But at some point when there's, virtually no more casting material for them to dive into, if it's just a pile of worms beneath them, I think it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to be able to dive down. So it does seem like if I'm able to scoop the stuff up to the top, it's nice and loose, and the light penetrates it really easily, and then the worms can dive out of it so that I can skim it pretty quickly. Oh, let's get this guy back in here. But we're definitely I think we're definitely approaching the point where we're not going to be able to separate much more. This is kind of the fun part. This is where the pile really starts taking on a life of its own. It's almost all worms at this point. I'm wondering if I can just sort of stack up the material a little bit better. And then maybe if I could do one or two more skims off the top, I think we're going to be pretty close. And the material doesn't have to be 100% free of castings, but obviously the more you're able to remove, the better you could see, what size population worm, migration you were able to achieve. So I think I'm mainly interested in it from that point of view. So sometimes I'll go a little bit extra, go a little bit further than I need to give myself a really good view of how many worms I've got in my haul. And then sometimes I'll even put it on the scale, and I think we'll do that today too. So let's give these little guys another minute or two to dive down. I'll do another skim or two. And at some point I think we're going to be at the point where we can check out how many worms we got. We'll even put them up on the scale and see how much they weigh. Got one guy trying to get away here, but as you can see, I've almost reduced this pile to worms only. There's obviously still castings here, and I think if we keep subjecting these guys to all this bright light, they'll continue to try to dive down. But for the most part, what's beneath them is pretty much worms only. And I would have to guess that if I were to pull all of this casting material off, it wouldn't amount to much more than, you know, an ounce or two. It's very light stuff, light fluffy stuff, and not much of it. So I don't think it's going to account for much of the weight in here. I think if we put it on the scale, then the majority of what we're going to be measuring as far as weight is concerned is going to be worms only. So I think we're at the point where we could probably transfer these little guys into a somewhat smaller container so we could put it on the scale. So you know, we'll just go ahead and we'll use this same container that we were using to collect up all the castings into and all the food bits, the stuff that's not worms. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide everything over from our collection box into this little tray. In here too, it seems every now and then I feel like I've got another opportunity to grab a handful of castings. So I'll just go ahead and scoop it out if I can. At this point I'm just throwing it right back into the VermiBag. But I mean, you know, you could tell there's really not much of it remaining in here. We're almost down to worms only. So why don't I create a little bit of a pile here in the middle. Because then when we dump them out, we'll have kind of all the worms will be at the bottom. So when we upend this thing and dump it into the new tray that they're being released into, all the castings will go down under them, and then we'll have pretty much worms on top, so we can really get a good look at them. But now I think we can put this thing on the scale and get an idea of how many worms we got. And now, since this table is pretty filthy, I'm bringing in this piece of newspaper to place underneath the scale. So I've been trying to do my best to try to keep this scale from getting all dirty. And let's see. Does it need to be zeroed? It's unusual. Usually it is it comes back to zero on its own. It's the first time I've seen a nut come back to zero on its own. Makes me wonder if some sort of a piece of dirt or filth got caught up in it. But whatever, if we need to, we'll zero it. I'm sure there's other things that could influence it getting out of zero. So right now I believe it's in the kilogram mode. So let's first see how many kilograms we came up with here. So that's 0.30 kilograms, and the container I know is 0.05 kilograms. So the material within the bin is 0.25 kilograms. And if you want to go with some sort of maybe an 80%, 20% ratio between worms and not worms, that would make for easy math. Then you would have like a fifth of a kilogram, 0.2 kilograms of worms. And rather than needing to convert that, why don't we just switch? Now that it's in pounds and ounces mode, what we're seeing here is 0 pounds, 10.5 ounces. And when I weighed this plastic container, that 0.05 kilograms, that's 1.5 ounces. So out of here, we could take off that 1.5 ounces, and we're left with 9 ounces worth of worms. And there again, if we subtract maybe another ounce, keep it in nice round numbers, then I guess what we're dealing with here is something in the neighborhood of about a half a pound, right? About 8 ounces, half a pound of worms in here. So that's not bad. Pretty good little extraction of worms. So the only thing remaining is for us to get their new home out here onto the bench and release them and get them out of all this bright light, let them take a break, and I'm sure they'll be glad when all this excitement is over. So let's get the release of the worms started. These little guys just keep on squirming. Once again, I've got all this material on the side that I feel like I could scoop off, but at this point, I'm just going to let this stuff go in with the worms. A little bit of extra casting material so they can feel at home in their new home. And I guess what's right here below them is the new container. I left all the cardboard and paper and plastic that was covering things up over on the shelf, and we'll cover everything up once the worms have been released. So let's not delay any further. Let's go ahead and get these little guys into their new home, and then we'll get them back up on the shelf, cover them up, and give them a little bit of peace. All right, here we go. Okay, I think we got them all. 1, 2, 3. This is usually our one chance to check out how many worms we've managed to collect when we're releasing them. So we'll spread them out a little bit and see if we can get a better view of how many we've collected. A nice little bunch of worms. Let's give them a few minutes to get situated in their new home, then we'll be finished. Okay, I think I still see a couple over here. There's one over there. For the most part, they've all retreated. So I think we're going to give these guys a break and take them out from under this bright light and give them some darkness and some peace again. After all this excitement we've put them through, we'll even toss a little bit of fresh leafy cover across the top. So here's the here are the materials that I had used to build the bin with originally. It's a piece of paper. You can see how damp the paper has gotten from just the materials that the bin was made up of. You know, all the moisture that the material was made up of. Trying to escape but getting caught by this plastic and collecting back down on that piece of paper. I'm sure that that piece of paper with all that moisture all over it is going to become a really popular spot for the worms to hang out in. And then since I do anticipate worms wanting to be right beneath this fairly see-through translucent plastic bag, I'll typically put a little cardboard covering, mainly for just, you know, darkness, to make that into a really hospitable, comfortable spot for the worms to hang out in. So we're almost done, but as we normally do at this point with a brand new bin, we're going to christen it as my newest bin by giving it the customary sticker. So I'm really pleased to present to you my newest worm bin. And finally, a secondary ENC bin after all this time of having all my eggs in one basket. So that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to give me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.